Standard Chartered today launched their Development Index as part of a new report entitled Measuring Sustainable Development. The index measures the change in various development indicators from 2000 to 2012 using GDP per capita, years of education, life expectancy, environmental health and ecosystem vitality, which means it is an indicator of progress over a period of time rather than a static ranking at any given point. Joining us on the line from London is John Calvary, Head of Macroeconomic Research at Standard Chartered Bank. John, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Now, what makes this index different from the Human Development Index that we saw come into play in the early 90s?
Yes, the Human Development Index was one of the first indices of this type, and even that is now beginning to look at progress over time. But of course, it doesn't include the environmental factors that are becoming increasingly important. So we looked at an index called Ecosystem Vitality, which comes from Yale University, and we added that in to our overall scores to get an idea of whether countries are really pursuing sustainable development or not. And what we found is a number of most emerging markets actually are seeing a deterioration in that element, even while they're growing in other areas.
Talk us through a little bit, John, about the decision to peg this across a period of over 12 years and why the benefits, what are the underlying benefits of having a moving indicator as against a static snapshot?
Well, of course, if you think of GDP, I mean, we do look at GDP in static terms. We compare countries in terms of GDP per capita, but we also spend a lot of time talking about growth in GDP. And I think if you're talking about development, what you really want is to see improvement. You want to see progress in development. So just looking at the static indicator is not really enough. And what is clear now is that there's more and more data coming out in these areas, in the areas of education, health, the environment. And so we can look at it over time in a way that really wasn't possible just a few years ago.
So overall, what does the index say about the general health of sustainable development on the continent?
It's actually quite positive for Africa. I mean, one of the reasons for that is when you're looking at growth, just as it's possible for emerging countries to grow faster than developed countries when it comes to GDP, it's also easier, if you like, provided the policies are in place, to make fast progress in other areas too, like increasing years of education or improving life expectancy. And so in our index, Ghana and Uganda, for example, come top out of 31 countries. That includes countries in Asia and developed countries as well. So some of the African countries are doing extremely well, and that's really coming from improving life expectancy and spending more money on education in particular.
John, if we were to look forward a little bit, what is going to differentiate the top performers in the future when it comes to sustainable development?
You know, I think the answer here is it's a mixture of things, and the sustainability part itself, the environmental part, is the most difficult. Most of the countries we're looking at, most of the emerging countries, actually go backwards on that, and that's because pollution has increased, habitat loss has been a problem, forest loss has been a problem. So they've been doing well on GDP and improved education, improved health, things like access to sanitation, but not so well on the environmental side. And that's the big dilemma out there, that emerging countries actually tend to end up degrading the environment somewhat. So the challenge is to find ways to grow and to improve human well-being while also helping with the environment.
Very briefly, John, before I let you go, is there scope to ensure that the findings of this index and the rankings feed into policy in emerging markets and in particular in Africa?
Well, this is part of a big effort by a lot of organizations, international organizations, governments around the world, to try to get a better handle on what we mean by development. It isn't just GDP, it's other things as well, and how can we measure that? And we have to take into account the environment, which we haven't done enough of until recently.